There's a moment in every relationship when a woman feels a sudden, chilling distance from the man she thought she knew so well. A wall of silence rises between them, unexplained and impenetrable. Questions flood her mind. Did I do something wrong? Why is he shutting me out? Doesn't he care? But what if the silence isn't about you at all? What if it's a battle he's fighting deep within himself, one he was never taught how to win? From a young age, men are conditioned to fear their own emotions. Vulnerability is portrayed not as a strength, but as a weakness, a flaw that threatens their very sense of masculinity. As Carl Jung wrote in The Development of Personality, what youth found and must find outside, the man must find within himself. Yet most men were never shown how. They learned instead to armor their hearts with silence, to hide their most painful feelings behind an expressionless mask. When a man is overwhelmed by love, by fear, by sadness, by confusion, he does not run toward expression. He runs from it. His instinct is to retreat, to create distance, to go silent. Not because he feels less, but because he feels so much that he doesn't know how to contain it. His silence is a desperate attempt to restore control over an internal chaos he doesn't understand. And so, a woman stands on the other side of that silence, trying to interpret it, trying to fix it, trying to heal him, when, in truth, his healing is a path he must choose and walk alone. Today we're going to explore the deep hidden psychology behind a man's silence. We'll uncover the emotional roots planted in his earliest memories, the silent wars he fights within himself, and how this pattern, if misunderstood, can trap women in cycles of self-doubt and pain. But more importantly, you'll learn how stepping away from the need to save or fix someone opens the door to your own empowerment. A quiet, steady strength that transforms not just your relationship with others, but your relationship with yourself. Get ready to see silence through a completely different lens, not as rejection, but as revelation. To understand a man's silence, we must first understand the world that shaped him. From the earliest stages of life, most boys are subtly, and sometimes brutally, taught that emotions are dangerous territory. In playgrounds and family dinners, in locker rooms and living rooms, a single message is repeated over and over. Real men don't cry. Real men don't show weakness. Real men endure without complaint. This emotional suppression isn't natural, it's learned. Carl Jung, in his book The Undiscovered Self, warned about the dangers of mass conformity, stating, "The mass crushes out the insight and reflection that are still possible with the individual, and that alone could keep men from being a prey to any passing impulse." A boy, desperate for acceptance and belonging, absorbs the rules without questioning. He learns that tears, fears, and even unbridled joy must be tightly controlled or hidden entirely. As he grows, this repression becomes second nature. Emotions are not processed, they are buried deep, like seeds in frozen soil. Vulnerability becomes a threat, not just to his image, but to his very survival in a society that equates emotional openness with weakness. Slowly, unconsciously, silence becomes his armor. The fewer emotions he reveals, the safer he feels. When intense emotions arise, fear of failure, grief of loss, awe of deep love, the man often does not have the emotional literacy to navigate them. Imagine an internal landscape that has never been mapped, where every strong feeling feels like a storm in the dark. Without tools or guidance, the easiest, safest reaction is withdrawal. Carl Jung speaks to this inner fragmentation in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, where he says, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved but only outgrown." Men, however, are rarely taught how to grow through their emotions. They are taught to suppress, to outmuscle, to endure, but not to heal. And so, silence becomes a language of survival. Many women witnessing this withdrawal misinterpret it. They see the man's silence as a lack of care, a lack of love, even a form of cruelty. But in truth, it is rarely about indifference. It is about incapacity. It is about an emotional wound so deep and ancient that it has become invisible, both to himself and to those around him. When a man falls silent, it's often because he is standing at the edge of an emotional abyss, one that he has no idea how to cross. He feels overwhelmed by forces within himself that he cannot name, let alone control. He cannot articulate what he doesn't understand. So, he goes quiet, retreating behind the only protection he knows. Sometimes, this emotional illiteracy leads to frustration, anger, or the truth is far more tragic. This is a man drowning inside his own emotional waters, desperately clinging to the silence that he believes is the only thing keeping him afloat. This tragic conditioning can create devastating misunderstandings in relationships. The woman, often more emotionally aware and expressive, may feel abandoned, neglected, unloved. Meanwhile, the man is not absent in feeling. He is present in struggle. His inability to communicate becomes a wall neither of them can easily scale. Carl Jung emphasized the critical role of understanding one's own unconscious motives in Ion researches into the phenomenology of the self, writing, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." A man trapped in emotional silence is often unaware that it is not fate or character causing his distance, but unexamined wounds from a lifetime of emotional suppression, and often he may not even recognize the magnitude of his own distress. He may rationalize it. "I just need space. I'm tired. I'm stressed." But underneath those surface explanations lies a profound inability to confront what he feels without fear. True emotional intimacy requires more than proximity. It requires vulnerability. And vulnerability for many men is synonymous with danger. Understanding. This doesn't mean excusing emotional unavailability or poor communication. It means seeing the wound beneath the wall. It means recognizing that silence is often less about you and more about a lifetime of unspoken battles. In reality, the silence is not passive. It's an active defense. A man's retreat into himself is often his subconscious attempt to shield himself from emotions he was taught he must never acknowledge, much less express. And so, if you find yourself facing a man's silence, understand, it's not your failure. It's not your deficiency. It's not a reflection of your worth. His healing is not your mission, and his silence is not your responsibility to fix. Healing is a door only he can open, and often the first step toward true connection is the acceptance that you cannot walk that path for him. On the surface, a man's silence looks calm, almost cold. His face is unreadable. His words are few if they come at all. To the outside world he appears composed, detached, even indifferent. But inside, a different reality is unfolding. Inside he is a battlefield. When a man feels overwhelmed by powerful emotions, he doesn't simply not feel. He feels too much all at once. His heart races, his chest tightens, his mind spirals in 1,000 directions. He experiences fear, sadness, guilt, shame, love, and confusion, sometimes layered so thickly that he can't distinguish one feeling from another. It's emotional chaos, and he has no blueprint for how to survive it. Carl Jung, in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, describes the unconscious as a vast realm of unknown forces, influencing behavior and experience beyond awareness. For many men, when deep emotions surface, it is this unconscious realm that takes over, unpredictable, unmanageable, overwhelming. Silence becomes a desperate attempt to impose order on inner disorder. Imagine trying to dam a river with your bare hands. That is what emotional regulation feels like for many men. Their silence is not peace, it's effort. It's survival. At this moment of internal collapse, expressing vulnerability would feel like tearing open an old wound with no guarantee of healing, only exposure. Fear whispers inside him. If you show them, they will leave. If you show them, you will lose everything. These fears are not logical, they are primal. They are embedded in the bones of his experience, stretching back to moments he may not even consciously remember. This is why men often detach emotionally during crises. It's not because they are uncaring, it's because inside they are drowning. They are clinging to silence not to punish you but to save themselves. And yet this silence is profoundly isolating. Jung explains in Memories, Dreams, Reflections that loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. Many men live trapped in this isolation, unable to share. The battles raging within them. Their silence builds walls not just around their hearts but around their lives. Silence, paradoxically, becomes both the defense and the enemy. It shields him from the terror of vulnerability, but it also robs him of true connection, true intimacy, true belonging. Every word left unsaid, every emotion buried, thickens the walls of his internal prison. It convinces him that needing others is dangerous, even fatal to his identity. This is the invisible war happening behind the blank stare, behind the unreturned text, behind the curt replies. A man who seems indifferent is often inside a man, terrified of collapsing under the weight of emotions he never learned to carry. The tragedy is, many women respond to his silence by moving closer, by pushing harder, by trying to break through, not realizing that the closer they get, the more threatened he feels, not by them personally, but by the terrifying prospect of being seen in his raw, unguarded pain. Jung noted in Psychological Types that every individual needs a revolution, an internal liberation from the collective attitude. Until man confronts the internalized beliefs that equate emotional openness with annihilation, he will continue to respond to emotional intensity with shutdown and retreat. Emotional proximity will feel like emotional peril. It's important to understand. The battle inside him is not one you can fight for him. Love cannot heal what shame forbids him to reveal. Presence cannot penetrate a wall he has spent a lifetime fortifying. This realization is not meant to foster anger or resentment. It's meant to foster clarity. His battle is real, but it is not yours to fight. His healing is essential, but it is not yours to carry. Compassion does not require sacrifice. Understanding does not require martyrdom. When you stand before a man locked in silence, know this: his quiet is not a measure of your worth, nor a reflection of your love's failure. It is a mirror of his internal world, a world shaped by years, perhaps decades, of emotional repression and fear. You cannot make him open the door, but you can choose whether to keep knocking or whether to walk away with your dignity intact. Choosing yourself in the face of someone's internal war is not cruelty. It is wisdom. It is recognizing that real love honors mutual growth, not endless rescue missions. And in that choice, you find not only your own healing, but the seeds of a deeper strength, one that no silence can ever steal from you again. When a man goes silent, a woman's mind often fills the empty space with self-blame. She replays every conversation, every glance, every word exchanged, searching desperately for the moment when things went wrong. She asks herself, what did I do? How did I fail him? Why is he pulling away? This reaction is not a sign of weakness. It is a testament to the depth of her emotional investment. Women are taught to nurture, to heal, to hold relationships together, with invisible threads of care and communication. Silence to her is not just absence. It is rejection, abandonment, and loss. But here lies a devastating misunderstanding. His silence is not necessarily about her. It is about him, about the internal battles he cannot articulate, the emotional storms he does not know how to weather. Carl Jung, in The Undiscovered Self, speaks to this misinterpretation of external signs, saying, "It is not that something different is seen, but that one sees differently." In other words, we project our inner fears onto external behaviors, interpreting them through the lens of our own insecurities rather than through the truth of the other's internal world. When a woman encounters the sudden chill of male withdrawal, her mind often rushes to self-criticism because it feels safer to believe I did something wrong than to face the terrifying truth that she cannot control the emotional currents between them. If she caused it, maybe she can fix it. If it's her fault, there is hope for redemption. It is an attempt to regain agency in the face of emotional abandonment. But the truth is harder and more liberating. It's not about fixing him or fixing herself. It's about recognizing that his silence is a reflection of his own internal disconnection, not a verdict on her value or worth. His withdrawal is not evidence of her inadequacy. It is evidence of his own unhealed wounds. In trying to fix him, By reaching out more, loving harder, explaining endlessly, a woman often falls into an emotional trap. She begins to abandon herself in an effort to hold on to someone who is not even emotionally present. She sacrifices her self-respect for the illusion of connection, pouring her heart into a vessel that cannot hold it. Jung writes in Psychological Aspects of the Persona, "The more compulsive the need to help or rescue others, the greater the unconscious evasion of one's own shadow." When a woman becomes obsessed with saving a man from his own silence, she unconsciously avoids confronting her own fear of being alone, her own shadow self that whispers, "You are not enough." And in the end, she is left not only depleted but also alienated from her own emotional center. Healing begins when she stops trying to bridge the unbridgeable gap, when she stops seeing his distance as an invitation for more giving, when she stops taking his emotional shutdown as a mirror of her flaws, when she sees clearly his silence is his struggle. It is not your indictment. Choosing not to chase is not a punishment. It is an act of self-respect. Choosing to let go is not cruelty. It is wisdom. Choosing to stand in her own energy is the first step toward reclaiming her power. Power that was never truly lost, only misplaced in the hands of someone who could not honor it. There is an old saying, "You cannot heal someone who refuses to acknowledge their wounds." Love cannot reach a heart that is fortified against its own vulnerability. A woman must remember, she is not less lovable because someone could not meet her emotionally. She is not less valuable because someone chose silence over connection. She is simply encountering the natural limit of what another soul is capable of giving at that moment. And it is in accepting these limits, rather than fighting against them, that she finds her liberation. In releasing the need to fix what was never hers to fix, she releases herself from chains she did not realize she was carrying. Carl Jung reminds us in the Red Book that you must let go of the life you planned so as to have the life that is waiting for you. In letting go of the fantasy of healing or saving another, a woman opens herself to the life that is truly meant for her, one grounded not in anxiety, but in mutual presence, mutual vulnerability, and mutual growth. And that journey of liberation begins with one courageous step. Stop making his silence about you. Start making your healing about you. There comes a moment, almost imperceptible at first, when a woman who has exhausted herself trying to reach a man locked in silence feels something shift deep within her. It is not a moment of anger or resentment, but a quiet, aching clarity. The realization that no amount of love, effort, or patience can pull someone from a place they refuse to leave. She understands finally that she cannot pour herself endlessly into a void and call it love, and that her worth was never supposed to be dependent on the capacity of another to recognize it. This awakening is not sudden or explosive. It is slow, almost painful in its unfolding, like the slow thaw of ice after a long and brutal winter. At first it feels like loss, the loss of a dream, the loss of an imagined future, the loss of a belief that love alone could heal what was broken. But as the days pass, she begins to see with increasing sharpness that what she is experiencing is not surrender, but liberation, a sacred disentanglement from a dynamic that has kept her shackled to the need for external validation. Carl Jung, in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, and it is precisely in facing this darkness, the loneliness, the disappointment, the wounded hope, that the woman begins to reclaim her scattered pieces. In turning her gaze inward, not to criticize or repair herself, but to truly witness herself without distortion, she finds that the emptiness left behind by his silence is slowly being filled by her own presence, her own strength, her own voice, as she stops chasing explanations, stops crafting apologies for needs that were never wrong, and stops trying to fix what was never hers to mend. She discovers a wellspring of energy returning to her, energy that had long been diverted into the hopeless task of holding together something that had no foundation. Detached from the compulsion to win his affection, she begins the painstaking, beautiful work of reconstructing her identity not around another, but firmly within herself. This shift is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, but seismic, a deep reordering of her inner world that alters everything about how she moves through life. No longer does she wait by the door for scraps of attention. No longer does she interpret silence as a call to give more. She steps back into her own rhythm, into the sanctuary of her own soul, and the dynamic inevitably changes. The man who once held power through withdrawal begins to feel its weight shift against him. Where once his silence created confusion and longing, now it echoes against a presence that no longer needs to be validated by his attention. Carl Jung, in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, reminds us, where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling, and it is in the woman's new serenity that this wisdom becomes manifest. Her heart and mind are no longer divided. She no longer sacrifices her peace for the chaotic emotional economy of someone else's. Inevitably, sensing the loss of her energy, he may attempt to return, offering gestures of regret, words that once would have pulled at her heartstrings. But by then, she is no longer the woman standing in the ruins of false hope. She has crossed a threshold, and her silence now speaks louder than any explanations could. She no longer needs to prove her worth to anyone incapable of seeing it from the beginning. This transformation is not rooted in bitterness or the need for revenge. It is rooted in dignity, the quiet, unshakable kind that no longer feels the need to argue or persuade. She does not close her heart out of fear. She holds it sacred out of wisdom. Carl Jung in the Red Book and said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." In looking within, the woman awakens to a life no longer dictated by the emotional availability of others, but shaped by the steadfast love she first offers to herself. She realizes that she never needed to be rescued, never needed to prove her worth by enduring emotional starvation, and certainly never needed to beg for love that should have been offered freely. In shedding these illusions, she opens herself not to the fantasy of love, but to the reality of it, a reality grounded in mutual respect, emotional presence, and true vulnerability. This woman, awakened by pain but strengthened by it, no longer fears solitude, because she recognizes it as sacred space, the fertile soil from which her truest life will grow. She walks forward not because she needs to show strength, but because strength has become her natural state, the inevitable outcome of a heart that chose itself after being asked too many times to choose someone else. In the end, her victory is not loud, not vengeful, not declared in grand gestures. It is quiet, dignified, and irreversible. It is the power of someone who has reclaimed her soul, and no silence, no absence, no regret from another can ever take that away from her again. It is one of life's quiet ironies that the moment a woman stops reaching for a man, stops waiting for him to find his way back, is often the moment he feels compelled to return, drawn not by understanding or true growth, but by the sudden, palpable absence of the energy that once fed his sense of security. He reappears, tentative, regretful, longing for a connection he once neglected. But what he does not yet realize is that time has done its work. The woman he returns to is no longer standing where he left her. She has moved inward, upward, beyond the place where his presence or absence defines her sense of self. She greets him perhaps not with anger or accusations, but with a quiet, impenetrable distance. A distance not rooted in resentment, but in the simple fact that she no longer belongs to him, emotionally or energetically. Carl Jung in Psychological. Types observe that what we are unconscious of meets us from outside as fate. For the man who returns, it often feels as though fate has shifted against him, when in reality it is merely the reflection of an internal journey he chose not to undertake. While he remained trapped within the fortress of his own silence, she traversed landscapes of pain, self-reflection, and healing, building a new world in which her dignity and peace are non-negotiable. His regret may be genuine, his realization may even be sincere. But it is not depth of remorse that will determine what happens next. It is whether the woman still sees a place for him in the life she has rebuilt, and often she does not. The bridge he once burned with silence and emotional absence is not easily reconstructed, for she has learned that love must be freely given, not begged for, and that true partnership demands more than mere proximity. It demands presence, accountability, and emotional courage. Her gaze tells the story he never stayed long enough to hear. It is steady, unwavering, filled not with anger, but with a serenity that he cannot penetrate. She no longer waits for promises. She no longer aches for validation. She simply stands, whole, complete, sufficient in herself. In that gaze, he may finally glimpse the cost of his silence, not through recrimination, but through the unbridgeable distance that now lies between them. Carl Jung, in The Undiscovered Self, reminds us, man's task is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious. For the woman, this consciousness has been achieved through pain and transformation. For the man, it remains an invitation he must either accept or decline on his own terms, without expectation of rescue or forgiveness on demand. And so he may offer words, apologies, promises, confessions of deep feelings long hidden, but they arrive too late to reclaim what was lost. Because she, in choosing herself, in refusing to diminish her soul for the sake of emotional crumbs, has crossed an invisible line from which there is no return. This does not mean she hates him, nor does it mean she wishes him harm. In truth, the most profound evidence of her growth is her ability to look upon him without bitterness, without the need to punish, without the desperate ache that once bound her to his inconsistency. She sees him simply as he is, a man who did not know how to meet her where she stood, and perhaps still does not. Carl Jung captures this ultimate realization in Memories, Dreams, Reflections when he writes, "The